Back in the 70s, the Americans realised they had a problem. They were training crews, but they were training crews by teaching them how to shoot at targets on the ground and then sending them off into combat. And the problem with that is you're not teaching them how to operate in a theatre of combat. And then the problem with that is the only way you learn is by getting shot at by the enemy, and that's not necessarily the most useful educational resource. They lost a hell of a lot of air crews to enemy action, especially in Vietnam, because they turned up and they were inexperienced and they didn't know how to deal with the tactics and the equipment that the enemy was using. And the solution they came up with was something called Exercise Red Flag. And the idea behind Exercise Red Flag was that they would create an opposition force who would train in the tactics of the most likely opposition, which at the time was Russia. And they would train this opposition force in their tactics. They would use F-5s because they most closely resembled the flight dynamics of the MiG-21, which was the most popular enemy aircraft at the time. And they would create these, out in the Nevada desert, they would make massive airfields out of the sand. They would make industrial complexes complete with like railway lines. They would make airfields and convoys and tank formations. And they would also put in SAM sites and actively manned equipment so that they could truly test the pilots that they were training in an environment that closely mimicked an actual combat arena. And it worked really well. It really helped to kind of push the abilities of air crews and really gave them a feel for what they'd be coming up against. And so very quickly they opened up the invitation to other countries and they invited the RAF to send some aircraft over to have a go at training as well. Part of the reason being that the RAF themselves had this issue of they would mostly be doing training flights in the south of England or around the UK or flying through the Mach Loop. And a lot of their bombing practice involved basically dropping smoke flares and markers. And the trouble with that is they don't behave like the real munitions. And also, when you're doing training that's very simulated, it's very easy to say, well, you know, I successfully hit the target, because it's difficult to prove what would actually happen. Whereas out in Exercise Red Flag, they were dropping the actual munitions. So if you were rehearsing how to use a 1,000-pound bomb, you dropped a 1,000-pound bomb. And that taught you a lot of things, especially about not being the guy behind the guy dropping the 1,000-pound bomb. So off they went. The RAF went into America to the exercise, and they decided to take these things, the Blackburn Buccaneer, because what they wanted to do was show the Americans, and this was by invitation from the Americans, they wanted to show how capable these low-level ground-hugging bombers actually were. Now, before we get into details, a little bit of real talk. Quite often, whenever you talk about subjects like this, there's always some joker who wants to tell the story of how, you know, 4 Royal Marines took on the entire USMC in a training exercise and beat them hands down and whatever else. It all gets really weirdly jingoistic and tribal. And fine, you know, a bit of banter's okay, but that kind of calls you out as completely not understanding the ethos of training. The whole point of Exercise Red Flag was to demonstrate how you needed to train to fail so that in combat you won. And that's what the US Army wanted, that's what the US Air Force wanted, that's what the Marines want. They want to train with people who'll push them to their limits, who will test their every chink in their armour, and they expect and hope to fail so that they can find these weaknesses and they can find where the problems are and train people how to overcome them. So the idea behind inviting the Buccaneers to come over was America didn't particularly have a low-level bomber that was kind of simple but effective like the Buccaneer, but they thought they might come up against it with the Russians, so they really wanted to make sure that they knew what to expect, and that's what the Buccaneer showed them. So with that in mind, the Buccaneers went out to Nevada to go and play in the desert, and they played. They spent days, and one of the things that came very clear quite quickly to the Americans was they couldn't catch them. And the Buccaneer pilots, they got a lot out of it too. They discovered things like if you're on an attack run and you get an aircraft behind you, the best thing to do is to just keep running forward. Anytime they tried to turn to evade, they would get taken out. So they learned the tactic of you attack a target and then you keep going. Because the other problem was if you attack a target, you drop a bomb, that makes a big cloud of smoke. Immediately, any enemy fighter in the area knows that you're there. So they're expecting you to turn to leave and go back to where you came from. So that's where they're hunting for you. So the idea was that the tactic became you fly in, you drop a bomb and you fly on. They also discovered that you need to have incredibly good timing, because if you're dropping a 1,000-pound bomb as opposed to a smoke flare, when it goes off, bits of hot, angry metal go everywhere. And if you don't get the spacing and the timing right between aircraft, then the lead aircraft that drops a 1,000-pounder has a very, very real chance of causing damage to the wingman behind it. But then that kind of worked in their favour too, because if another enemy aircraft was chasing them, they were less keen to go flying after somebody who dropped a 1,000-pounder, because they might be flying into a debris field. So everybody learned stuff, but what the Americans learned was that these things flew so close to the ground that they just couldn't distinguish them. They couldn't pick them up anywhere near quick enough. And quite quickly, over the initial few days of the exercise, they realised that on the tally boards where they'd be scoring, simulated kills, but basically they had a much higher standard for what counted as a aircraft kill. So they had a scoreboard, and these things just weren't appearing on it. And it wasn't until they started using the F-15 Eagles, and they were using their look-down radar, that they started to get some success at finding the Buccaneers. But the fact was, even the F-15 Raptors were having a hell of a time trying to locate these and take them out before they were hitting their targets. In the end, in the exercise Red Flag, everybody won. The USAF crews gained a wealth of experience dealing with these kinds of aircraft. The Buccaneer pilots learned how to really hone down their tactics and how to get the absolute most out of their radar-avoiding, missile-avoiding, terrain-hugging ways. And it was an incredible success for everyone involved. But I am going to indulge in a little bit of Rule Britannia and read you a quote. This comes from US Defence and Foreign Affairs Daily. And they said that close observers say that some of the tactics adopted by the Buccaneer crews have astounded the USAF, who are surprised that an aircraft, now some 17 years old, can defeat the efforts of such types as the F-5E and the F-15 Aggressor. Yeah, I called it an F-15 Raptor earlier, I meant Aggressor. Tongue slip. To others, it's no surprise the Buccaneer has long been one of the most underrated aircraft in combat inventories. And what the Buccaneer really won in the deserts of Nevada was the respect it's due, because there's nothing else like it as a low-level combat aircraft.